love the opportunity to do a master's in body psychotherapy. I always wanted to do a... Sorry? Yeah?
Yeah. I always wanted to do a master's or something like that, and wanted to do it in something I was interested in. And Jill Westland, who runs the school in Cambridge, set it up. Unfortunately, it's not available anymore, but I just got there. And I realized that as I've been working as a biodynamic psychotherapist for a long time, and I didn't quite know what actually was happening in the body, so I wanted to understand that more. And after that master's, then I wrote about psychoperistalsis. I felt, Goethe, it's something that's really from Goethe, psychoperistalsis. Let me actually read my notes a bit. So she realized that the peristaltic movements, so the tummy rumblings, are actually the body's internal self-regulation system. So she just became aware that, like when we're hot, we sweat, when we're cold, we shiver. She realized that the tummy rumblings were also a sort of releasing of inner pressure. That's our body just does. Yeah, it's part of self-regulation. And she found out, and she realized that working with the peristaltic movements was sort of a key into the autonomic system. Sorry, I need to... It's quite a lot standing up here. So I am a psychotherapist. I just read lots of books, and I'm pulling things out of books. I'm not scientific or biological, but I just put things together. Yeah? So here we go. Let's see. So, well, that was the bits, about Goethe. 1922 to 2005. So my presentation will cover first a bit about her background in Norway, then her discovery of psychoperistalsis, a bit about the guts. It's called a second brain, and the first person to call it like that was Michael Gershon in his book The Second Brain in 1998. And then gut and emotions, gut and peristaltic movement, emotional repression and connective tissue, and then psychotherapy and psychoperistalsis, and then psychoperistalsis sounds, the sounds of psychoperistalsis. So there's quite a lot to cover. I bet it's get on with it. So her background in Norway, Goethe married young. She married when she was 19. She had 3 children quite young. And then later on she read a book by Harold Shelderup and realized that she was neurotic and wanted to do therapy because she didn't want her kids to grow up neurotic. She had one session with Dr. Haverfall, which was very impactful. I can say more about it, but maybe there's many other things to talk. She then studied psychology at the university and started writing training analysis with Olle Raknes, and studied physiotherapy. It was actually Nick Weil who recommended that she studied physiotherapy, and she always wanted to work with Nick Weil, but that never happened. And then she worked in the Adolf Bulo Hansen Institute with Barrett, and Trygve Brottoy was the psychiatrist. Had more therapists with therapy with Dr. Houch, and then was a clinical psychologist in Denmark, in Dijkmark Hospital, and at home she had a private practice where she combined the massage with the psychology. And then in 1969 she comes to London. Yeah, so she leaves Norway, comes to London. The influences on her theory. So in her psychology studies, she learned about Freud, Jung, and then through Raknes, she learned about Reich. And the bodywork influences were Adolf Bülow-Hansen, particularly about the hypertonic muscle structures, Lillemore Johnson about hypotonic muscles, and then Dr. Ollesen about fluid stasis. So Dr. Ollesen was in Denmark. Gerda had got massages from Adolf Bülow-Hansen, and she had these beautiful tennis legs. But with the deeper muscle work, they became very fluid-filled. She lost her beautiful legs, and then she heard about Dr. Ollesen in Denmark, who worked with fluid stasis. And he was very important later on to a lot of her theory. So I'll come back to that. And this is how she discovers psychoperistalsis. So she mainly developed her theory through observation and intuition. So she noticed it, with her clients, and also she did a lot of work on herself with the stethoscope. So you had the physiotherapy, so you had the psychology, but there was a lot of things that were not discovered yet when she found her theory. Sorry. So, for example, the enteric nervous system, that's sort of discovered only later on. That means the gut has its own nervous system. At that time, the gut was really only seen as just for food digestion, and people didn't realize how much nerve connection there was really. The complexity of the digestive system came only later. She knew about connective tissue, but not about the complexity of connective tissue. And the migrating motor complex, that's about peristaltic movements. And also, all the neuroscience wasn't there yet. So she was before her time, really. The neuroscience was sort of, 1990, 2000. In 2015, there was a book by Julia Enders that was very, very popular. They got the inside story of our body's most underrated organ. So that all came much later. And that's when I wrote my article in 2016, I used those books to underpin a bit what Gerda had said. But preparing for this one, I've got another book. This is the other book, The Mind-Gut Connection, and it underpins it even more. So I'll talk more about that. It's a fantastic book. Her daughter Mona Lisa coined the phrase, the word psychoperistalsis, in 1970. So she worked in the Adolf Bülow-Hansen clinic, and she realized that people that had strong vegetative reactions, so diarrhea or throwing up, or strong emotions like screaming or sobbing, that often they would improve. Yeah. She also realized that when people have talking therapy, and she saw talking as a bit of a gentler way through the mouth of processing things. Yeah. And she wondered, therefore, is there also a gentler way lower down to process? Yeah, like we do. And she found that psychoperistalsis, the tummy rumblings, were doing that. And she realized there was a clear link between the release of fluid stasis and the intestinal peristaltic movements. Yeah. Now, fluid stasis, I talk more about it, but it's like, when there is charge, a lot of blood flow comes to ready for expression, and then when it gets stuck, we call that fluid stasis. Yeah. And you can often feel when there is a sort of pressure in your tummy, or you feel a bit full, and you get a good tummy rumbling, there is a sense of releasing. And she also realized, because she worked all the time on herself with the stethoscope, that when she was worried about something, a bit like what Claudia said, like when she was angry with Gerda, no sounds. When she could express it, suddenly the sounds could come. And Gerda found it as well at home, that if she was worried, she couldn't get the peristalsis, but if just the radio went on, or there was traffic, or there was a dog barking, that was fine, as long as there was no emotional connection. So she really felt that connection between emotional disturbance affecting the psychoperistalsis. So this is a bit from Gerda's writing. She said, "I now began working on the surface of the muscle membrane only. As I did so, I noticed an intriguing phenomenon, quite loud gurgling noises. The sounds of peristalsis could be heard from my patients' abdomens. Each time that I worked this way, I now heard the same story. My patients told me how they clearly felt the inner pressure from which they were suffering diminishing during the massage, and little by little, they felt their anxiety slipping away." Yeah, so that's Gerda writing about discovering that. And Tore said yesterday already that talk about, when she worked in another clinic and during the rush hour, her clients didn't have that release as much because she couldn't hear the sounds quite as much. And this is a bit more Gerda. So the discovery made my work with my patients much easier. Now I could regulate my massage to produce a more dynamic or more gentle effect. My technique became extremely precise as I learned how I could lead my patient's awareness into deeper layers, or simply dissolve the layers that were ripe and closest to the ego. Working in this way, guided by the peristaltic sounds, I could also treat cases of depression and hysteria, which we were not allowed to treat with Adolf Bülow Hansen's methods. But with my new massage method, I could simply choose how deep I wanted the effects of my work to go. That's quite a thing, huh? Looking at the time. Somebody will keep the time for me, yeah? Good. So now I want to look a bit at the physiology of the gut. So this is an overview. So, like I said, in the old days, the guts were only thought of as digestion of food. But so much more has been now discovered. It's the largest sensory organ, so interoception, I don't know if people know the term interoception, but it's basically, we often think things start with the brain. It's the brain that starts everything off, but that is proven not to be right. Actually, the brain responds to what the messages the body gives it. Yeah? So interoception is about the body telling the brain about internal pressures or pains, and also about responses to the external environment. Then that goes up to the brain, and then the brain gives messages back. Yeah, and the gut is the largest of those sensory organs. Yeah? It's not. There's a huge network of neural connections in the guts. It's the enteric nervous system. I'll come back to that later, but there is more than that. The vast majority of the immune system is located in the guts. A huge number of endocrine cells, so that's the hormone-releasing cells, are in the lining of the gut, more than in all other endocrine organs combined. Yeah. 95% of serotonin is stored in the gut. Now, I'm not quite, there is the blood-brain barrier, so the serotonin of the gut doesn't seem to come into the brain, but I'm not quite sure what the connections all there are, but it seems to be important. The surface area of the gut, if you spread it out, it's the size of a basketball. It's probably the size of this room. Everybody's gut, if you really were to spread it out. So that's a huge area to get information from the brain, for the brain. And there are thousands of little sensors signaling molecules in the lining of the gut. There is now the microbiota. That's been one of the latest discoveries, the microbiome. I'll come back to that as well later. So, but there are 100,000 times more microbes in your gut alone as there are people on Earth. This is incredible. And most of the lymph is located in the gut. So you can see there is a lot going on in the gut. Yeah? And in this book, it even says there is even taste and smell receptors in the gut lining. We don't know why, but so there's a lot that we don't know. The nerve supply. There are 3 nerve supply systems to the gut. First is the enteric nervous system. So that's a completely independent nervous system. It can function totally on its own. You know, why does an organ have that? Huh? Then the second one is the vagus nerve, the craniosacral vagus nerve. It goes to lots of other organs, but it's got many branches into the intestines because the intestines is such a big area. And what's interesting as well is 90% of the vagus nerve information goes from the gut to the brain rather than the other way down. Yeah, only 10% down, most of it goes up. And then there are the peripheral nerves that come out from the spine. So Michael Gershon was the one who wrote as I'm aware, for the first time really about the enteric nervous system in 1998. And in this book, Meyer, he says that more than 90% of sensory information collected by your gut never reaches conscious awareness. So for most of us, it's easy to ignore the daily sensations from our belly, yet the autonomic enteric nervous system is monitoring them very carefully. So we're getting, so that's what I like about us working with the guts and clients becoming more aware of the gut rumblings. We become more attuned to what is our belly actually trying to say, because in general it's only 90% we become conscious of, but there's a lot of feedback we get. Emerson Meyer calls it also the gut-brain axis is like a supercomputer. And there's a sort of two-way communication between the brain and the gut the whole time. So the brain signals back to the smooth muscles in the gut and the nerve cells and the immune cells. And gut feelings are stored in fast databases in the brain, and that helps us make decisions. So the brain has stored databases of gut sensations, yeah? And of course, when you have had a difficult upbringing, or there's been a lot of fear, then what the brain will have stored about from the interoception is actually the world is a frightening place. Yeah, if you've had it good, then the world is a better place. But that's what the brain has taken from the gut. The two ways of communication are through the nerves or through the bloodstream. So you have the enteric nerves, the sensory neurons sent up, and the vagus nerve, which Emerson Meyer calls the information highway for gut-brain traffic. And then, of course, again, the peripheral nerves via the spinal cord go up to the brain as well. So lots of communication channels through the nerves. In the bloodstream, there is the hormones, and the endocrine cells sit in the lining of our guts, and then the inflammatory signaling molecules from the immune cells also give a lot of information. So Meyer writes, in other words, when it comes to collecting, storing, analyzing, and responding to massive amounts of information, the gut-brain axis is a true supercomputer. A far cry from the plodding digestive system steam engine it was once thought to be. Yeah. So there's a lot going on. A bit about the microbiome. And nowadays you have all kind of things, microbiome for mental health, It's proven it has an effect on our emotions as well. So there are 100 trillion microbes, 360 bacterial genes for every human gene, if you think that. And they're mainly in the large intestines, but also in the mucus in the lining of the guts, and in the skin, face, nostrils, mouth, and eyelids. But again, mainly in the intestines. Gut microbiome differ from person to person. It's also what you get from your parents, what you get, from birth, and you now have this fecal microbiome transplantation. So if you have a bad microbiome, you can get some proof from somebody else to give you better microbiomes. Microbiome assists with digestion, regulating metabolism, detoxifying, training the immune system, providing vitamins. And as microbiome also live in the mucus in the lining of the gut, it's in a prime position to influence our emotions. And this I find quite lovely. The microbes connect us through a shared biological communication system to all the other microbiomes in the soil, the air, the oceans, and other living creatures. We are closely and inextricably tied into the Earth's web of life, which is lovely. And Nikki talked to me about a book or a person. You said, how can we say that we are human when there are so many more microbes than human cells in us? So it's something to consider. So I want to talk a bit about the gut and emotions because, we use psychoperistalsis as part of psychotherapy, which is very much working with people's emotions, repressed emotions. In this book, and it's the first time that I read so clearly about it, again, in this book, he had this picture, and he says, emotions are closely reflected in a person's facial expression. A similar expression of our emotions occurs in the different regions of the gastrointestinal tract, which is influenced by nerve signals generated in the limbic system. Signals to the upper and lower gastrointestinal tract can be synchronous or go in opposite directions. So, for the first time I'm reading so clearly that what you can see on the face, you can see if somebody's sad or angry. The same as sort of, if we could look into the guts, you could see the same thing, and it makes sense that, when there is anger, there's a sense of rising energy. When there is sadness, there's a sense of going down, and fear is more of a conflict, maybe a fight-flight sense, or a freeze. Yeah. So again, for me, this was sort of confirmation of what Goethe always thought. This is why I'm showing you this. So what are emotions actually? So the physiological components of emotions are that they're sort of basically neural and hormonal communications to and from the brain. Yeah. And there are emotion-specific circuits within the limbic system of the brain. So if an emotion comes up in the gut, there is a specific signaling molecule that goes to the brain that releases a particular substance in the brain, and then a whole entire program related to an emotion gets brought down, to the gut, to the muscles, to ready for action. Yeah. So, there are the happy emotions, the endorphins, the dopamine, the oxytocin, and there are stress emotions, and they all set off a particular program. Yeah. Stress emotions, the corticotropin releasing factor, the CRF. That's sort of seen as the stress master switch. Now, emotions create fluid pressure because if there's the nerve signals, the neurotransmitters, but there is all these hormones pushing now through the blood, ready for expression. So there's a lot of fluid pushed out, pushed into the periphery. Okay, yes. So, so there's an increase of fluid with the rising of emotions, and there is that sense of pressure. And then if there is the expression, then it comes back down. Okay. So, and of course, you know, we're in this morning we talked by people in Palestine have, you know, they probably have inherited emotional patterns from their background. So there is the whole transgenerational stuff and the influences by events in our life on how the operating system works. The signaling molecules come from the immune cells. Yeah. Anyway, so that our emotions, our brain, and our guts are uniquely connected. That's what I'm trying to say with all of this. So, the enteric nervous system and emotions. So the enteric nervous system has got sensory nerves, interneurons, and motoric nerves. It manages the digestion. And when there is emotional arousal, so the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system is in work, then the enteric nervous system function gets interrupted by the brain's emotional circuits. Yeah, so again, Claudia's example, like when I feel angry, my guts are not rumbling, my guts are not digesting. Once the emotion passes, the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system comes into play, and the enteric nervous system switches back to local control. And the more viscerally aware I am, the more emotionally attuned. Yeah, so the brain-gut microbiota axis is more active during sleep, which makes sense. Again, we are getting out of the way, and the unconscious can the body can start clearing and working. So Meyer says, in fact, the gut can handle most of its activities without any interference from the brain, while the brain seems to depend greatly on vital information from the gut. So the gut and peristaltic movements. So this one I found interesting. So what they do know is that there is peristaltic movements in the gut that is not about food digestion, and they call it the migrating motor complex. And here maybe I'll do the whole list. So the migrate, so they know there are contractions in the gut when there is no food. And then they say that's every 90 minutes, and it is a sort of cleansing. It's the little housekeeper of the gut. And it's fully activated during sleep. And Meyer says it's likely that these contractile waves are associated with the release of many signaling molecules transmitting information to the brain via the many gut-to-brain communication channels. Yeah? What I find so interesting here is that, now that when we think about the guts, first was just about digestion, now we see how huge of a system it is and how much is involved. We don't even understand it all yet. When we think of the gut, with the microbiome now, a lot of studies done on all the influences of the microbiome. When we come to the peristaltic thing, we go small again. It's just about cleansing the food rests out of the gut. And I think something is being missed here, that Goethe knew there is much more, the peristalsis does much more than just cleaning the food rests out. Yeah, so it feels like here we still have the old thinking, and people don't put the dots together. Although he does say, there's a lot of release of signaling molecules and a lot of information going on. So why, when we've seen already there's so much connection with emotions, why doesn't it get linked here? Yeah? So I think that won't be long until people say, oh, we need to all listen to the gut rumblings when we do specific yoga for gut rumblings and, meditation techniques for gut rumblings. I don't think it will be long. Because it feels to me this is the last bit of Goethe's theory that hasn't been backed up yet. And everything else is now understandable. So what creates peristaltic movement? It's created by the smooth muscles. There are longitudinal and circular muscles in the intestinal walls, and so that's controlled by the enteric nervous system, but there is also the interstitial cells of Cajal. I don't know if I pronounce it well, the ICC cells, and they create a slow wave movement also in other organs. It's not just in the guts. So, and they are called, the own pacemakers. So there is something that's not nerve related. The parasympathetic nerves, including the vagus nerve, stimulate the gut function, and the sympathetic nerves inhibit the gut function. And they are usually activated in tandem, reflecting a particular emotion. And different segments of the gut contract, and fluid squirts in both directions, and this is what we can hear when we talk about the peristaltic sounds. So in Goethe's day, I think that's what so, Michael Gershon in his book talks that serotonin, the neurotransmitters, also stimulates peristaltic movements. So there might be many other hormones that stimulate as well. So when Goethe, again, because all of this was not yet known, what he did have was this article by Professor Johannes Zetterkleif in 1964. I don't quite fully understand his article, but what I do get is that he talks about a certain stretching. So when there is a sort of this tension pressure in the lining of the guts, that also sets off peristaltic movement. So, and then we think again, okay, this tension pressure, so that's fluid pressure. Yeah, and before we saw there was this link between emotions and fluid, increase of fluid. And so this theory fitted with Boyson's theory of energetic fluid, fluid stasis, visceral armoring, and tissue armoring. And I will talk tomorrow, I will talk more about these concepts and how they fit in with the psychotherapy. And she saw these, the visceral armory, the tissue armory, the stasis, she saw that as part of emotional repression. This has to do with how we repress our emotions. The only other one that was at that time was Walter Cannon. In 1911, he did one of the first studies, I think, on the guts in animals, and he did also discover that even with a slight disturbance, a psychic disturbance, so again a sort of emotionally triggering disturbance, was accompanied by the stoppage of the peristalsis. So, and Gershon wrote in his book as well that there are still many, many serotonin receptors in the guts that we don't have any idea yet what their function is about. Okay, psychoperistalsis and connective tissue. So this has to do with emotional repression, and again I will go more into that tomorrow. So how do we repress emotions? So Wilhelm Reich, he talks about we hold emotions back in muscle armor. It's held in muscle contraction, and he talked about character armor. So if you have a very chronic muscle armor that creates a particular character, it also has to do with developmental stages. And Gerda Boysen added the concept of tissue armor and visceral armor. So she saw that when there is an emotional charge, there is an increase in energetic fluid. So she calls it energetic fluid because the fluid is charged. It's charged with hormones. Yeah, it's not neutral. It's the fluid has energetic charge. When there is a conflict, you get stasis, and it holds back. That creates an energetic block. After a while, the fluid will disappear, but the hormones and the waste products, the neurotransmitters, will stay stuck in the tissues. Yeah? And then you get tissue armor. And the same happens in the fluid stasis, is also in the lining of the gut. And then that's called visceral armor. Yeah? So interstitial fluids is I'll talk more about it tomorrow as well. And, connective tissue is such a, it's like fascia, but it's such a huge area as well, and it goes from fluid to very strong tendons. And what happens when there is fluid stasis is there is a sort of stopping of the movement of the expression, yeah, and the fluids, the interstitial fluid, that's the fluid between the cells and the capillaries, where there is a lot of, not all the capillaries reach every cell, so the capillaries, the oxygen and the nutrition goes into the interstitial fluids, and then the cells take up the oxygen and the nutrition and push out the waste products, and that's all sits in the interstitial fluid, and then the lymph and the veins will clear that out from there. Yeah. So, but if there is a sort of stasis, if there is a conflict, there is a sort of stopping, and the interstitial fluid can become fibrous, because connective tissue can do that. It can go from fluid to fibrous and back as well. And that's how we see that as tissue armor. Yeah? So I hope people can follow me. I will talk more about that tomorrow. And therefore also she said emotional repression happens everywhere simultaneously. Yeah? So it's not just in my fists where my anger is, it's all over. Yeah, the charge has gone all over, and it always includes the guts, because the guts are aware of everything, are involved with everything. Yeah, and she has this concept of the vegetative tree. So you can sort of imagine a tree, and this is the trunk and the roots, and you would see this would be the guts. Yeah? And then this goes to the jaw, this goes to the fists, this goes to the brows, to the back. Yeah? So it's a whole patterning, and it goes everywhere. Okay, going the wrong direction. Sorry. Oh yeah, a bit more about connective tissue. A huge network that connects everything. It's produced in specialized cells called fibroblasts. It can vary from fluid to strong fibers. All vessels and ducts are embedded in connective tissue. In the time of Reich, of course, and earlier on, when there was a body, they would cut everything out, and you would only see the muscles and the bones. Nowadays, everything that was cut away is actually so important. And again, there's so much knowledge now about fascia and connective tissue. Thixotropy is the capacity of something that's thick to become fluid, and it's so that it can change consistency. Interstitial fluid is a form of connective tissue. It surrounds each cell, so I talked about that. lymph and veins absorb the waste products, but they need movement or pulsation to be able to do their job. So when there is a stasis, the lymph and the veins won't be able to clear out, and things get stuck. And most of our lymph is located in the guts. So how does this link to psychotherapy? I talk again more about it tomorrow. But what we know about psychotherapy is that it helps clients to process and assimilate emotional experiences. And it does that by building new neural pathways and maps in the cerebral cortex. Yeah? So the talking through in therapy rewires and remaps the brain, and then there is a different context around the experience. And so next time I won't get quite as upset or as scared because I've created a different context, a different mapping around the interchange. So that creates change in a client. And in biodynamic psychotherapy we do that too, but we also focus on changes in the muscles and tissues, as well as changes in the autonomic responses. And psychoperistalsis is an autonomic response that we can track because we can hear the sounds. Psychoperistalsis helps to change the fluid pressure in the walls of the intestines, which can potentially release emotional repression elsewhere. So if you think of a vegetative tree, if you can clear the fluid pressure in here, because that's sort of central, then that whole pattern can be cleared out. Yeah, so a repressed emotion can really be, you process it, you create different mapping, but you can also really cleanse it out of the body tissues if there is a good clearing and a good big peristalsis release. And cleansing the body tissues results in building emotional resilience and physical, emotional health, physical and mental health. And again, psychoperistalsis, because it's the parasympathetic, is mainly active when we feel safe and is an indicator of parasympathetic activity. So Goethe also found that you could have the peristalsis, so the linking to the emotions. It doesn't mean that every emotion needs to become conscious. That's again because it is essentially the body's self-regulation. So she discovered that psychoperistalsis can eliminate emotional charge and nervous tension, and that eliminates the stress products of the tissues, and it can be sort of like an inner switch, and so you don't necessarily have to be conscious of the emotion that you're now clearing out. And she writes nicely about that here. So she says, first of all, this energy rose up through the emotional channel with an urge to find expression. The emotional channel, she felt the alimentary canal was the emotional channel. When I was unable to express it, it went down again, rippling down my body like a mild, warm breeze. While it was thrusting its way upwards, it could provoke screams and emotional discharges, but it could also reverse its direction into a harmonizing, descending movement that dissolved tension completely. This is how I discovered what I call the fountain or the melting principle. And this is where biodynamic massage can be so useful, that we can sort of clear out stuff without necessarily it having to be an emotional process. Now a bit about the sounds, the inner language, and I'm going to, these are quotes, I call it the inner ocean, that's my term, because it's unfortunately, we haven't really heard the terms, but it sounds, we heard the psychoperistalsis, but it sounds like you're underwater a bit, And also to remember that when we were in the womb, we all will have heard our mother's peristalsis going. Yeah. So it's a sound that brings us back really very far into our unconscious as well. and there are many different sounds. So I'm going to quote here quotes of Clover, who wrote really beautifully about it. So she says, so this is about how we use it to guide our touch. This is how we use the psychoperistalsis to guide our touch. So she says, with practice we learn that the belly sounds come as a very specific response to what our hands are doing in a massage. For instance, we move a hand slowly down a person's shin. The shin is here, the lower leg. Yeah? At a precise moment, as our hands pass a precise spot, we hear a sound in the stethoscope, showing us that this particular spot in the body is now ready to discharge, change. Our next stroke can work precisely on the responding spot to find more sounds. Apart from the fascination of the variety of the sounds, their precision is equally exciting. By paying attention to exactly which millimeter of the client is responding and at exactly what depth and to exactly what sort of touch, in which direction, we can go on an amazing energy dance with our clients. Yeah, and you saw that a little bit in Lena's demonstration as well, where she stopped when, you paid attention when there was a little sound, and then you named it and then the sound went away. So, the whole array of sounds, again, Clover Southwell. The psychoperistaltic sounds come in an astounding variety, some very watery, some very dry. The sounds are sometimes continuous over several seconds or even minutes, like peals of thunder. Sometimes they are brief, intermittent, sometimes they're very noisy in the stethoscope, the sounds even hurting one's ears. Sometimes they're so faint one can hardly catch them. Sometimes the sounds seem reluctant to come. Sometimes it seems to be bursting, as if escaping from a pressured bag. The bursting water or thunderous sounds we regard as very ripe. This means that the body area we are working with is ripe and ready to discharge the fluids. The dry, percussive, intermittent sounds are more unripe. It is as if the energy we are moving is hitting against the client's armor, knocking to get through. The area we were working with is responding. The process of change is underway, but it is not yet fully ripe. When we get no sounds when working in an area, this means that the area is still relatively dead, the energy there unalive. Gradually, over the weeks of work, the area will gradually begin to ripen and give a few sounds. So I hope that gives you some idea of how we work. One more slide. And this is about how it helps us to deeply listen to the person. It makes us very attuned. So through our hands, again, Clover Southwell, through our hands we are conversing with our client about how he lives his life. Breathless, fearful, hectic, apathetic, stable or explosive. We are silently inviting him to dare to let some restrictions melt and to trust himself to be who he truly is. We marvel at all that unfolds as session after session, the flow of his life force becomes more coherent and free. We are offering suggestions to a person's life force, new directions, new possibilities. Every tiniest shift of our hands is inviting some change. From second to second, our client will be either welcoming these proposals or resisting them, though generally on a far from conscious level. We use all our senses, eyes, hands, ears, to see how he's taking these suggestions. With such acute listening, a client may feel more deeply touched, more personally contacted than in other massages. So that's, Clover describes it really poetically and beautifully. So that's basically the end. This is sort of the books that I've been using at the beginning. So there's the Damasio book about, that's more about what are emotions really from a neuroscientific point of view. Second Brain by Michael Gershon, the gut book by Julia Enders, that became a great hit in 2015. I got very excited when this book Rumbles, that came out this year, 2024, and I read it, and there is nothing in it about psychoperistalsis. It talks a lot about how over the ages of history, how difficult it has been for people to control our guts movements and our gut sounds, and how embarrassing it is when we have gut rumblings and things like that. So still nothing about peristalsis, but this book, The Mind-Gut Connection, comes really far. So he described really beautifully how, the link with emotions and guts, but then he goes more towards the microbiome. So, Job's Body was a book in. Oh, I should have a list here. No, sorry. Let me go back. By Dean Juan, and he wrote quite beautiful about all the systems in the body. I read one of his earlier books. There are many more editions, but I got a lot about connective tissue from his book, and then there are the 2 books from Goethe. I do have English versions of those, Entre Psyche et Soma and Van der Lust am Heilen, The Joy of Healing. And then the end book is the beautiful collection of 150 articles, many by Goethe and by Clover, and some by me, and many other contributions that Courtney Young put together for us 2 years ago when it was Goethe's centenary, and it's a great gift, and very cheap. And you can get it from his website, and then you have loads of articles. I have them printed out, and it's about that many. But that's, yeah. So there's that. And I wanted to say that, this presentation for me is in honor of Gerda Boysen, my teacher, and it feels actually very precious to come back to Oslo. Yeah. I feel like, from my article now, it's been a new step that I've made with the connection with the emotions. And to bring it to Oslo first, I don't know if I ever speak about it again, but here it is in Oslo, feels really special. And also really remembering that during her life, Gerda tried very often to explain her theories to others and was always dismissed. A lot to do as well because she was a woman. But also, if she had had the backup she had now, it would be very different. And also when people saw her work with the stethoscope, well, that was quite a different thing. She was really a magician with the stethoscope. She could do incredible things that I can't do, many of us can't do. I think Mary Malloy comes the closest in working magic with the stethoscope. So there's still so much to learn of what Gerda knew and what Gerda intuited. And it's amazing that she knew this 60 years ago already, and how psychoperistalsis can be used as a key to health, but also to self-awareness. The more we are aware of our guts, messages to our brain, the more we are connected to our deeper self. And that's
the primary personality, which you're going to talk about tomorrow.
Yes. Tomorrow I'm talking about her concept of the primary personalities, and the secondary personalities are defenses, and how the psychoperistalsis is links those together. So I'm looking forward to continuing that, and I hope, this was good.